Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf, Menachos Daf Pei. We begin on Ayin Tes Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. We're going to pick off where we left off yesterday, where we learned in a Brisa, based on a pasuk, that the extra Korban Todah comes without bread, although typically a Korban Todah is part of a package. There is the animal, there is the basket of breads, but that's only if it's the primary, original Korban Todah. Well, let's say you have the offspring, Vlad, Tmura, an exchange, a switch, Khalife, it's a backup, and now you have an extra one. That extra one comes without bread. So it's offered as a Todah with the same, krava process, the same consumption time frame, a day and a night, but without bread. Shalach Rav Chanina. So Rav Chanina sent a halacha. Shmid Rabbi Yochanan, quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Loishon, when do we say the extra one is without bread? That's only Ella la'achar kapara, if he already was makriv the original one. Aval ifnei kapara, but if it's now still before that, he hasn't yet processed the first todah, and now he has this one here, and he chooses to be makriv this one, to unin lechem, it comes with bread. Havi bar Rav Amram. Rav Amram sat down to try to analyze this. Havi means he analyzed it. He asked. He queried. What's the context of this halach? Ahaya. On which case, which types of extra korban are we talking about? You can have offspring, Vlad, you can have Tmura, that's when you make that, switch. You have Khalife, which is where he was makriv an extra one, the first one, was missing, and he was makriv a replacement, and now he discovered the first one, he has an extra one. Which case are we talking? Are we speaking about Khalife? This was set aside as a replacement for the missing Toidas Chayva. Toidas Chayva means that he had personally obligated himself to bring the korban. There are 2 ways to commit to a korban. You can say harizu. Well, this animal is now going to be my korban. Now, you are not responsible for that animal. If it goes missing, you don't have to replace it. You don't have to back it up. It's not a personal obligation. It's sort of a donation. Chayva means I am going to bring the chayva. So that's what happened. He experienced, some sort of traumatic, experience. He was saved from Beis Asurim, released from prison. He recovered from a serious illness, whatever. And he said, I am going to bring a Harelite Toida. And what happens is that if he's responsible if something happens, if the animal that he now designates goes missing, he has to replace it. And that's what happened. It was an obligatory todah. It disappeared. He replaced it with another one. And now the first one was discovered. He has 2 standing before him. So that's the case. And he chose to use the new one, the second one. Now, Rabbi Yochanan's halacha was, well, if it's still before the act, if he hasn't yet processed the original one, and he chooses to process the replacement instead, it comes with bread, because this becomes the primary. If it's afterwards, then it's the extra one without bread. Now, this is sort of old news. We already know this from the Brisa, yesterday's Brisa, which teaches us exactly that. Ilifnei kapara. So, is the main lesson regarding before kapara? Meaning, if he hadn't yet processed the original one, rather he chose to do the chalifin instead, it needs bread, tanina. We learned that in the Brisa yesterday. Ilacha kapar tanina. Likewise, I was speaking. That's lacha kapar. He already processed the original one, and now he has the second one here. Now, when we talk about original, second, it doesn't really matter which one or 2 or 1. We learned in the Brisa you have a choice. It's up to you which one you want. But the point is that he chose one over the other. Now he has the second one sitting here. Ilach kapara tanina. That's also discussed in yesterday's Brisa. The second one has no bread. So what's Rabbi Yochanan's chiddush? Over to Pei Amud Aleph. was speaking that it was not a Toidas Chayva. It was Nedava, it was a donation. Rashi says, Harezu. Picked up an animal, says, this is going to be my Toida. In which case, he has to bring it as a carbon, but he's not responsible. If something happens to it, he doesn't have to replace it. And that's what happened. It got lost. He decided, I want to bring another one instead. Even though he's not really obligated to do so, he wants to thank Hashem, he wants to make sure that his Toida is processed properly. Okay, so now he has two, because he found the first one. Again, he was mafresh a carbon for Toida. Harezu. This is my Toida. It disappeared. He did a replacement. He found the first one. You have two in front of you. Well, says the Gemara, it cannot be. Why? Bein lefnei kapara. Rabbi Yochanan cannot be speaking about this case. Rabbi Yochanan, who differentiated between before or after kapara, who cannot apply to this case, because in this case, bein lefnei kapara, whether he hasn't yet processed any of them, this is the first one. Bein lacha kapara, or even if it's already the second one, tunis lechem, they both need bread. You know why? Listen to this point. Mara b'toidasu. You see, in contrast to the first case, where he personally was obligated, it was toidas chayva. So in that case, when he designates a replacement, it's in order to fulfill his personal obligation, right? It's considered a backup to the first one, in which case, once he chooses one of the two, the second one is merely considered a leftover, a backup, which wasn't really needed, so it's without bread. But here, by an adava, there is no personal commitment. In which case, the whole concept of bimafresh, a backup, a replacement, is not really applicable. And if he chooses to do so anyway, it's like bringing a new carbon. They both become primary. None of them are considered secondary. Right? So each one is sort of an independent carbon on its own. So even if he actually is makriv one, the other one is considered primary as well. And there's a chiv of bread. It's a regular carbon toida. Ma'aber b'toida is increasing the number of toidas. So again, in this case, it wouldn't be applicable. Ella, let's look for another option to apply Rabbi Yochanan's distinction. Ella avlad toidas chayva. We're speaking about an offspring of vlad. Of a toidas nedava. Okay? So again, it's the toidas nedava. It's only the animal, but it's not a personal obligation. And it had an offspring. Well, in this case, again, bein lifnei kapara. Bein lacha kapara, whether it's still before or after he processed the mother, the offspring does not need bread. Ein tu'unin lechem. Why? Again, moiser de toidahi. It's a leftover. It's secondary. Elo, so let's look for another option. Avla toidas chayva. The mother was toidas chayva. So he was obligated as a personal obligation. And then there was an offspring. Comes Rabbi Yochanan and teaches us, what's the status of that offspring vis-a-vis bread? Lifnei kapara to'an lechem. If it's still before the act, if the vlad is being offered first, yes, bread. Why? Because this is considered a fulfillment of his obligation. So basically, the vlad can sort of step in and serve as the primary toida, whereas lacha kapara. But if it's already past kapara, it's after the mother was brought as a carbon. So this vlad is extra. Ein tu'unin lechem. There's no bread to it. As we learned yesterday in the brisa, a vlad is meiser. It's extra. There's no bread, unless it's used as the primary. But here it's already after the fact. My kamashma. What's the point of? What's the main lesson that Rabbi Yochanan is trying to teach us? What's he coming to teach us? The answer is like this. The Kasav Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is teaching us. Rabbi Yochanan holds Adam b'schaper b'shvach hegdish. Interesting point, that even though the vlad is not really the owner's doing, it's Hashem, right? The animal of hegdish. It was already hegdish, and then it had a vlad. It's called shvach hegdish. The gain, the increase, that came about in the Hegdish possession relates back to the owner, and he can use it as a fulfillment of his obligation. And therefore, if it's used first, then you bring bread. And again, this is only because this was a chayva, personal obligation, so the vlad sort of stands by and can be used as a fulfillment of that obligation. And if in fact he used it first, he chose to use that as his korban toida, that's the primary, and it comes along with bread. Okay, so we tried many options in terms of trying to decipher and apply Rabbi Yochanan's halacha, and we discovered the solution. It was a teidas chayva, and a vlad. Because Rabbi Yochanan teaches us, the vlad can be considered his primary. If he chooses to use it first, it comes with bread. Abai as well delved into this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan. He also was wondering what he meant, and he came up with the same solution. Itmar Nami, you find likewise in Beis HaMedrash, clearly that Rabbi Yochanan himself went through all the different options, as we had said. Itmar Nami, Amar Yitzchak Isam Rabbi Yochanan, Chilufei Teidas Chayva. If it's a Teidas Nedava, it's merely a Teidas Nedava, which again does not involve the owner as an obligatory person. It's the obligated person. It's the behemoth itself, but he's not obligated to back it up or to guarantee its success. He decided in any case to designate a backup just in case. So it doesn't really have a status of backup. It's considered a new taida, in which case it comes with bread. He now has two primaries. It's not like primary with secondary. Whether he's doing it before the first one was offered as a korban, whether one was already offered, now he has a second one standing. In all cases, this is not leftovers. This is not secondary. Tun and lechem both require bread. Why? For the reason we explained. So he's merely increasing the number of his toida. Instead of one, he chooses to bring two. They're both primary toidas. Now, vlad toidas nedava. On the other hand, you have a toidas nedava and has a vlad. In this case, it's just an extra one, because he's not standing by to back up, to guarantee the safety of the korban, because it's a nedava. He's not required to vouch for it, so the offspring is merely an extra one. Whether it's before or after kapara, any ton lechem doesn't need bread. Why? Moiseh toida is an extra one. But vlad toidas chayva, in which case we hold the owner responsible for the safety and well-being and success of the akrava, and now it had an offspring. That offspring also serves in that role. It's there to guarantee the fulfillment of his pledge. So if it's considered, if it's offered lefnei kapara, if it's the first one, that becomes his primary tun and lechem with bread lach kapara. But if you already brought the mother, now he has the ein tun lechem, the child does not eat lechem. Okay, pretty clear. Amar Shmuel. Here comes another sort of formula pertaining to our discussion. Kol shebechatas meisha b'toida ein tun lechem. In many cases, the halacha is that a chatas will be left to die. 5 cases. Vlad of a chatas, a korban chatas and an offspring. That offspring, halacha l'meisha Sinai, you don't bring it as a korban, it's mesa. A temura of a chatas. Another example is a chatas whose owner already fulfilled his obligation with another one, so it went missing, and he did a replacement, and he found the first. So the rule is, kol shebechatas mesa, v'toida ein tun lechem. A situation where if it would happen by a chatas, the halacha would be misa. So correspondingly, in a similar situation by a korban toida, like a vlad toida, tmuras toida, etc., you bring it as a korban, but it doesn't have bread, because it's considered sort of downgraded. Kol shebechatas roya, but a situation where if it would happen by a chatas, it wouldn't be put to death. It's not that much rejected. It's just somewhat rejected. It's roya. You would let it pasture, wait to get a blemish and redeem it. So, not so terrible. And therefore, correspondingly, in a similar situation, if it happens to a korban toida, but toida tun lechem, it still retains its full status with bread. So that's Shmuel's sort of formula. You want to know which toida is with bread, which one without? Take a look at the chatas. A similar situation by chatas, what happens? Misa, over here there's no bread. Roya, over here there is bread. Masiv Rav Amram. I have a question, says Rav Amram. on this rule. We have this brisa yesterday, focusing on the pasuk hatoida yakriv. We learned from there. How do we know that? Let's say a person was mafresh a korban toida, it disappeared on him. He was mafresh another one as a backup, and then lo and behold, here comes the first one comes walking back in, and now he has two. So we learned yesterday. Which one does he choose? It's up to him. Menayin, how do we know? Yaakov can choose whichever one he wants as his primary. And primary means Valach Ma'ima with its bread. Yaakov means it's up to him. Now what's the status of the second one vis-a-vis bread? Without bread, right? Does the second one eat bread? New, right? The new says only the original, the primary one, not the second one. Echad, only one, V'lishnayim, not the second one. So basically, the extra, replacement one, whichever one he chooses to sort of not use, does not need bread. But how does that fit with our formula? If it would be a chatas in this type of situation, you wouldn't say misa, you would say raya. Now raya by chatas equals bread by taida. How does this work? If you look at chatas kagamna raya, a similar case by chatas would involve raya. This none. We have the shittas chachamim coming up in the Mishnah that it's raya. Rabbi disagrees. The chachamim say raya. Chatas. That's our case. Here's a chatas, disappears. Here comes another one. The other one comes walking through the door. You have both of them standing. He uses one as his carbon, the second one is misa, going to Rebbe. Rebbe says even this case is misa, the Rebbe is considered rejected because he chose not to use it. The Chacham, no, they say in this case there's no misa, ein chatas mesa. The misa is only in a case where ela shenimtzes la'achar shenschapra bailam. Only if you discover the other one after kapara, then you say, but now, koidem shenschapra bailam, right? But in this case where you found the second one before kapara and you have both standing there, there's no rejection taking place, it's only raya. Okay, so by a toida, right? If raya by chatas, by toida there's bread, and here we say there's no bread by a replacement korban toida. Says the Gemara, Shmuel k'Rabbi Svirli. You're right, Shmuel does not go with the Chacham, he was like Rebbe, who's just told us, the Amar who says, Avuda b'shas afrosha mesa, that if the animal was lost when I was mafresh the second one, so the extra one goes lemisa, and misa by chatas equals no bread by the toida. Okay, so it works. But that was only one part of the equation. There was another part of the equation as well, that if there's roya by chatas, there's bread by toida. Ela roya le Rebbe mishkachas. What do you find the case of roya by chatas according to Rebbe? If going like Rebbe, it's all misa. The answer is there's one case where even Rebbe agrees that an extra korban chatas is roya. Suppose he was mafresh two to begin with. It's not because one went missing and he's replaced. He was a extra careful fellow. He says, I'm not going to take chances. I want to make sure I get my chatas done. I'm going to put aside two to begin with, just in case something goes wrong. In this case, there's no rejection. There's no misa. There's no. So initially, he was mafresh two. Mischaper be'ezmen sheyir, so he could choose whichever one he wants. The other one is riyah. Okay, so likewise, by the toida, there should be bread. Whoa, this says the Gemara, but it's not going to work again because, sure, you discovered a case where even Rebbe will consider a chatas for riyah, but if you look at the toida world, there's no bread by the extra toida. Even in this type of case where it was originally meant, yes, the halacha, an extra toida doesn't need bread. So back to our question. Ella rather Shmuel k'Rabbi Shimon Svirli. The answer is Shmuel is like Rabbi Shimon. The Amor says that even in this case of Rabbi Yeshia, where initially he was mafresh two, the extra one goes lamisa, chamesh chatos mesa. All five cases of la tmura, extra one always go lamisa, regardless of the circumstance. So yeah, so even in this case, by a chatas is misa, and therefore by a toida in a corresponding case, there's no bread. But again, that only addresses one part of Shmuel's formula. Shmuel had another part of the formula. That if there's roya by chatas, there's bread by the toida. V'haroya the Reb Shimon last club. Shimon does not hold of roya. There's no case at all according to Reb Shimon of roya by the chatas. The answer is Shmuel never said it. Shmuel nami chaduk amar. We thought Shmuel said two parts, but really Shmuel only got up and said one point. Chaduk amar, he said one part of this equation. He said, this is the system. Kosher b'chatos mesa, b'toida and tuna lechem. Period. When there's misa by chatas, in a similar case by toida, there's no bread. Stop. He didn't say that if there's roya there, there's bread here. Because there is no such case, according to Shmuel, who follows Reb Shimon. So what's the point of Shmuel? Why couldn't he just say, could have just said very, very simply, he could have said, I hold like Reb Shimon, that, why do you have to say it in this way? Oh, so let's recall, Rabbi Yochanan taught us that Adam mischaper shvach hegdish. Even if the hegdish animal gave birth, the owner can use it as his kapara. Shmuel disagrees with that. And that's the main thrust of Shmuel's halacha. He's trying to dispute that point. Maika mashmon la'afuke, as opposed to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan the Amar told us before, Adam mischaper shvach hegdish. A person can use the offspring of a hegdish carbon for his own personal kapara. Kamashmon, the only point of Shmuel is no, we don't allow it. How do we see that from Shmuel? Because he says, look, take a look at what happens by a chatos. There's any misa by chatos, then by toida there's no bread. What's an example of a chatos that goes lemisa? Vlad. So even though it's a chatos chayva, he's obligated to take care of it, to make sure it's a personal obligation, but to say vlad, halacha is that goes lemisa. Correspondingly, by a toida, even if it's a personal korban toidas chayva, the vlad cannot serve as a primary toida. And in all situations, there's no bread to that vlad. In disagreement with Rabbi Yochanan, who says that a person can use the vlad of his toida for his own personal kapara. In which case, if he chooses to bring it as his primary, it becomes with bread. Continues the Gemara. Amar Ab. Okay, the fellow got up and said, Zu toida, this is my korban toida animal, Zu lachma, and here's the bread. And it was in a dava. He didn't put it upon himself. It was a pledge on the item itself. This is the toida, this is bread. Now what happens if something goes missing? Avad alechem. Bread's gone, maybe lechem achar. So the toida animal retains its status. It just lost its bread, so you replace it with different bread. Of the toida, however, if the animal itself goes missing, so he lost the ikar, eina maybe toida acheres, he can't replace, even though the bread's sitting here, he can't fill it in with another toida. Why? My time, why? Lechem glalo, leglal toida. The bread comes on account. It's an add-on to the toida, to the toida animal. It's the secondary to the primary. And therefore, even if the bread goes missing, just bring new bread. As long as the animal's still here. But toida, ve'ein toida leglal lechem, but the toida animal is not considered secondary and a tafel to the bread. So if the animal goes missing, the whole carbon unravels. You cannot reuse this bread for another carbon toida. Pamarava, going along the similar track of considering the animals the ikr and the bread as the tafel. Okay, so he set aside $1,000 for the toida, thinking that the animal cost as much, but it's taisru. Okay, over time base, but it's taisru, and there's some leftover money. Can he apply it for bread? Can he use it to buy lechem? Maybe buy lechem, use it for bread. On the other hand, the lachma he toida in taisru, he set aside a large amount for the bread, and he has some change. And maybe he can't use it for the animal. Why? My time. Why? Is it because of Rav Kahana? Where do we find that the breads of the toida are labeled as toida? Toida is a word used to describe the bread as well. The pasuk could have said, and he brings chalis for this. It says v'hikriv al zevach hatoida. It could have said v'hikriv chalis al zevach hatoida. Instead, it says v'hikriv al zevach hatoida chalis. The Torah here is indicating that the chalis, in a way, are also called toida. Hatoida chalis. So we see that the chalis are called toida as well. And that explains why the money meant for the chalis can also be applied for the toida of the animal. Well, if that's the case, then they're interchangeable, so it can work the other way too. Leftover from the animal money can be used for the bread. No, says the Gemara once again, lechem ikri toida. We find that the breads relate to the toida. They're labeled as such. They identify with the toida. So leftover bread funds can be used for the animal, but toida leikri lechem. Sorry. So therefore, funds meant for the bread We'll get that in a second, okay? Lechem ikri toida. Bread is called toida, but not the other way. Toida leikri lechem. The animal itself was never referred to as lechem. Right? So something meant for lechem cannot be used for the toida. But vice versa, it works. Something meant for the toida can also be applied to the lechem, because the lechem, in a way, are also called toida. So it's a one-way transfer. Vamarava. Okay, continue what we started before. That chalife toida, the one that was meant for a backup and eventually was not needed or used, comes without bread. Here comes an interesting case. Vamarava. Hifresh toidas evolved. Okay, so he designated, let's call him animal 1. Disappeared. V'chazar v'hifresh achetz achteo, and then he designates animal 2 instead. V'avdan, that too disappeared on him. V'chazar v'hifresh achetz achteo, and then here comes number 3 instead. And now, suddenly they're all standing up. Nimtu Rishonis, and all of them came back. He has 3 choices. 1, 2, and 3. So the question is, which one is considered primary and which one is secondary? So again, we're working with the concept that only the ikar, the primary, needs bread. But if it's chalife, it was meant as a backup, as a replacement, which was not used, which wasn't needed, because he chose his counterpart, he chose the pair over this one, so this one's an extra one without bread. Okay, so here comes the case. He has 3. And he chose to use the first one, number 1. So if he chooses to use the first one, number 1, as his primary with bread, shniya, in a tun lechem, so the second one comes without bread. Because it's only secondary, it's chalifin. It was only meant to replace the first one, he chose the first one over the second one. Second one is secondary and no bread. But shlishis, here comes an interesting chiddush. Number 3, tun lechem, needs bread. So although his purpose was to replace number 2, but since number 2 lost its status because it was merely considered secondary to number 1, right? When he chose number 1, that became the primary, and number 2 became secondary. So now the third stands alone as a new independent sort of primary toida. He's not considered a replacement. He's considered like primary, and shlishis tun lechem comes with bread. So again, even though he was makar the second one, but since the second one did not need bread, which means to say it had lost its status, it was merely considered like a fifth wheel. So the third one, even though it was there to replace the second, but it's not considered chalifin. Chalifin is only when I'm there to replace a real toida, a primary one, but in this case, I'm not. So therefore, tun lechem comes with bread. Now, Nischaber B'Shlishis chose to use the number 3 first. Shniya eina tun lechem. So we sort of reversed the sequence. So the third one is now considered primary, and therefore shniya eina tun lechem, number 2, comes without bread because its replacement, number 2's replacement, which was 3, was turned into primary. So now number 2 is relegated to second place. But Rishayna, let's go back to number 1, tun lechem. He's not a fifth wheel, he's his own carbon. So although number 3 had already been brought as primary, but it doesn't adversely affect number 1, because number 1 and number 3 are too distant. They're not directly linked to each other. Number 3 was there to replace number 2, number 1. So therefore number 1 is not affected by whatever you do with number 3. And therefore Rishon tu lechem needs bread. Bam tzois. Third case. Let's say chose to be makar of number 2 with bread. So now it adversely affects number 1 because number 1's replacement had been chosen as primary, and it adversely affects number 3 because 3 was just to replace number 2, and now number 2 is considered the primary, which relegates number 3 to second place. We chose number 2, shtein tunas lechem, both 1 and 3 come without bread. Abaya Amar, he says, doesn't really matter which one's first, which one's second. Whichever one he used first, it automatically relegates the rest into second place. They're considered chalifin without bread. Shtein tunas lechem, they both, the remaining 2 do not eat lechem. Kulu chalipin dadadinina, going to Abaye. It's all one big relationship. They're all connected to each other. Because let's think, the reason why he even got to number 3 is because he was missing number 1, and then he had number 2 because 2. So the first one, number 1, is really what triggered the whole system. Ultimately, they're all there to cover for number 1. So they're all closely connected. They all have a relationship, a direct relationship with each other. which case whichever one you use as your primary impacts the rest and turns them into secondary. Amar B'Zeira, same exact formula would apply to a chatas, right? The same idea. If you're missing and you replace, and right, same idea. Amar B'Zeira b'chein chatas, chatos. So again, let's go through the opposite. The case is hifresh chatas v'avda. He was mafresh chatas number 1, disappears. V'hifresh achar tachtel comes number 2 instead. V'avda disappears. V'hifresh achar tachtel comes number 3 instead. V'nitzu rishonos, and you find them all. Parishtoshton ayus, and you have 3. Which one's considered the ikka? Which one's considered, lamisa? Neschapa b'rishona. If you decided to use number 1, shniya Thomas. Number 2 goes lamisa. But shlishes tira. Number 3 has not been outright rejected. It's not needed, but it's not considered so rejected because, as we explained before, number 3 is not really adversely affected by number 1's activity. Neschapa b'shlishes. On the other hand, if you decide to use number 3, shniya Thomas. Number 2 is lamisa because its counterpart had been rishona tira, and number 1 just goes l're'iyah and is redeemed. Chooses the middle one. Number 2, Shtei Musu, that adversely affects his counterparts on both sides, because he was there to replace number 1. So number 1 is now 5th wheel, and he is considered primary to number 3, which also goes l'misa by Omar. He doesn't differentiate. Whichever one you decide to use, Shtei Musu, we send the other ones l'misa. Why? Kula chalipim dadadinin, they're all considered interrelated and backups for each other. Now, what's the point of adding this whole story with the chatas? Once we already discussed the same, formula by the Toida, what's the point of repeating it for the chatas? All the time, perhaps I would think it's different. There was a point in mentioning chatas separate. Why? Hasam with ikka lamemar, mara b'toidesu. In the case of the 3 toides, we can readily understand how number 3. So even though you already was makar number 1, number 3 is not affected. Perhaps you know why? Mara b'toidesu, because it's adding a new toida, even though ultimately in its root. The reason why you even got to number 3 is because of number 1, right? Which sort of triggered the whole chain reaction. But ultimately, number 3 is not that directly related with number 1, right? He's just there to replace number 2. So it can be considered a new toida, like a brand new independent entity. But over here by the chatas, you can't. A person can't just wake up in the morning and decide to bring a chatas. If he even got to 2 or to 3, that's because of number 1. Because he was obligated to bring number 1. So really number 3 is inherently related with number 1. So perhaps you can't consider it separate, unaffected by what happens to number 1. So you can't say I'm just adding chatoisu. Perhaps I can't differentiate. I can't keep number 3 as immune to what happened to number 1. Kamashman, the point is I could. Ultimately, he's not directly related to number 1, and therefore he can be spared. Here comes a new case of a toida mix-up. Toida, so we know that the ikar toida needs bread, but not the tmura. He sets up another animal next to the toida. He says this should be an exchange or whatever, an extension of that. It has a dinner of a toida. It's processed like a toida, it's eaten like a toida, but it has no bread. Toida is avar b'tmurasa. Now what happened was these 2, the primary and the tmura, got mixed up. We can no longer identify what's what. Now, if you just stop there, you're still okay, because you bring a batch of bread and you say, look, whichever one is the toida, okay, so the bread belongs to that one, you makar both and you're good. But here one died. You don't know which one died. So what's the surviving one? Is this the real toida, or is it the tmura without bread? So the survivor, you can't fix it, there's no way to do anything. We're out of options, what should we do? Nakriv lechem bada, should we add bread? Dilma tmura, maybe it's a tmura, it doesn't need bread. No, nak lechem bada, should we just ignore the bread? Dilma toida, maybe he's the toida who needs bread. Now let's just figure out what happened here. How did this whole mix-up start? Ida amar alai. If the owner had personally committed to the toida, a personal toidas chayva, here comes a very simple solution to the problem. It wouldn't be enough to lay maisi le behem achrina, v'lechem. You can't get away without backing it up. Right? Since he may have lost his toida, which would require him to replace it, so he has to bring another carbon. With bread, v'leiman, he should declare like this. If the survivor is a tmura, without bread, okay, here comes my new toida, which I have to bring because I missed my opportunity. I obligated myself and I lost it. This is the new toida that I have to bring with the bread. Simple as that. If the surviving animal is the real original toida, here's the bread. Okay, for that. And the new animal that I brought is achrayis. I was obligated to bring it because I'm responsible, just in case. So fine. and it doesn't have bread because the achrayus doesn't need bread. Very simple. So the Gemara, you're right, in this case it would work. What happened was he said harizu. He didn't personally commit himself to the Torah. He says, this is my Torah. Okay, and if it goes missing, he doesn't have to replace it, so you can't bring another one as achrayus. So those sitting in front of Rebbe, which Rashi says is referring to Levi. Levi apparently was a strong Talmud of Rebbe. He proposed as follows. He says to Rebbe, look, I have a solution. Just bring a basket of bread. He'll say like this. If the surviving animal is the real toida, halachma is the bread. Eloi, if it's not, if it's the tmura, the bread should just become chulin. Okay? No loss. Amar Lusur, Rebbe says that's not a solution. Since when could you bring mundane material into the azara? So you're taking a chance that it's really chulin, you have no business bringing it to the azara. That option is off. Here comes another idea. Bring another animal with a batch of bread and declare like this. If the surviving animal is a tmura, okay, I'm now donating a new toida with bread. If the surviving animal is a toida, halachma, here's the bread for that animal. And the new animal is not a toida, it's a shlamim. I can bring a shlamim. So he said that's not going to work. Because he's shrinking, he's minimizing the time frame of the shlamim consumption. Typically, you have two days and a night to consume the shlamim, but now he's going to treat it like a possible toida, which has a much shorter time frame, a day and a night. In which case, if there's extra and he can't get it in time, he's going to have to burn it. So we don't relegate ourselves to this type of possibility. Amar Levi l'Rebbe. So now Levi was called by his name. Amar Levi l'Rebbe. Rashi says it's the same person as before, but earlier it was together with the in company of the other Talmidim, so it's called L'Meidim of Rebbe. Here it was privately, directly to Rebbe. He says, I have an idea. Bring another animal with bread. And declare like this. If the surviving animal is a tmura, so I'm now donating hot toida valachma, new toida and bread. If the survivor is the real toida halachma, the bread that I'm bringing now is for that. But having moisa the toida, and the new animal is moisa, it's leftovers. And we learned before, leftovers doesn't need bread. Omar Leis Rebbe wasn't impressed. He says, I think it appears to me that he's not really speaking. It doesn't make sense. He spoke very sharp. He has no brain in his skull. Meaning, this solution is not really workable. Can you go ahead and offer an animal as a maisar? Maisar means if there's leftovers, by circumstance, so fine, it's leftover. You can't go ahead and submit yourself to a process where you're designating something as maisar. Right? You have no business doing that. So therefore, again, we're stuck without a real solution. We'll continue tomorrow. Perhaps we'll discover some sort of eitzah for this confused fellow. Okay, let's start again. We had a halacha regarding leftovers, switches, offsprings. All those do not need lechem. There's one case that according to Rabbi Yechon, Rabbi Yechon points out, highlights a case where there is bread by the that's the vlad toidas chayva, and it's based on the idea of adam eschaper b'shach hegdesh. If he's obligated to bring a toida and there's a vlad to that toida, you can use that as your primary. That becomes the primary with bread. The other one does not need bread. Shmuel disagrees, and that's why he correlated it to the chatas, where the vlad is lamisa, corresponding by the toida there's no bread. We got an interesting sort of one-way correlation between the bread and the toida. The bread is secondary to the toida and not vice versa. This can manifest in two cases. Lost bread, you can just replace it, and leftover money can be used for the bread as well. We had an interesting machlokes between Rav and Abaye when we have sort of a chain replacement situation. How closely related are they? According to Abaye, it's all one happy family. According to Rava, 2 is connected to 1 and 3 to 2, but not 3 to 1. What about a toida with a tmura that got mixed up and one died? Any solutions? Well, we're sort of hard pressed. Perhaps we'll discover one tomorrow. All the best to you and Atzlacha.